started. Great. Okay. Well, thank you all for joining me. Thank you to all of our artists who are here before me right now. And thank you to everyone who is watching us going out live on Facebook or maybe on our YouTube channel when the festival has finished. If you're watching on YouTube, it's over. It all went well. Everyone survived. All is good. So I'm Beth. I'm the Artistic Director at Poplar Union, and the 7 or possibly 6 actually at the moment people you'll see joining me are all of the artists whose work was shown today as part of the 2nd day of Poplar Union's Digital Arts Festival. So we had a Q&A last night with the first 7 or 8 artists whose work was shown yesterday. And if you didn't get to see that, then head over to our YouTube page and you will see all of the films submitted there. And you can also check out our website because we've also had a digital exhibition submitted as part of the festival as well. So it's well worth taking a look at. So the whole point of tonight's Q&A is for you to hear from these artists and not me. So I will try to keep things brief. But just by way of introduction, this is Poplar Union's 2nd ever Digital Arts Festival. We did our first one back in August, on August Bank Holiday. But for both festivals, we've invited and commissioned a collective of artists who respond creatively to the brief, looking out, looking in, looking up. That was all we gave them. And as you'll see, if you've been watching the films today, the diversity and variety in people's responses to that brief is really inspiring and kind of mind-blowing. So yeah, and we're going to sort of get into the detail of that work shortly. But before we do, I'm just referring to my notes. Every time I'm looking off this way, I'm just checking some notes. I should also just add that it's lovely to welcome Erin, Hutching and Stacey Green, who are interpreting tonight's Q&A. So you should be able to see them nice and clearly here on Zoom. Yeah, so enough from me. I think we will hand over to our artists. I'm going to sort of pick on them one by one just to add a bit of tension and excitement to this Q&A. Just to introduce themselves and then just briefly introduce the work that they've submitted as well. And I'm going to go in order of just people on my screen right now. So we will start with the very wonderful Clare Smith. Just say hello and tell us a bit about your piece, Clare. Oh, and you are on mute, Clare, sorry. It wouldn't be a Zoom Q&A without someone talking while they're on mute. I think that has to happen for it to be a Zoom event. There you
go. So yeah, hi everybody, and thank you, Beth. I was hoping I would be last, so I would have some idea of how to do this. My name's Clare Smith, and my work is called Layers, and basically it was looking at images of the environment around here and the looking out at Canary Wharf, looking at the contrast with other areas around here, and looking in caused by the health pandemic that we've experienced recently. So then made into a video.
Great. Lovely, thank you, Clare. And yeah, so we'll be introducing all of our artists, and then I will be asking you all of my burning questions, and I have plenty for you, Clare, so we will be coming back to you. Who is next? Let's go to Jackie Lou, who together with Roz Currie, they make the Sign Collectors. So maybe Jackie, if you want to introduce yourself, and then Roz.
Hi everyone, I'm Jackie Lou. I'm a lecturer in sociolinguistics at Birkbeck College. I work with linguistic landscape a lot in my academic work, so it's been really fun doing something completely different with the signs for this project. really grateful to Poplar Union for this opportunity, and also to Roz for embarking on this journey with me. So maybe I can ask her to talk a bit more about our project.
Yeah.
Am I meant to be speaking now? Sorry. So I'm Roz. I'm a curator, a social history curator, and as actually, it is relevant to say that I'm on maternity leave at the moment. So as the world started closing down, suddenly I was in this world where I got a new baby that I didn't really know how to look after, with nobody to talk to, nobody to help. And it was kind of terrifying. And words are one of the ways that I manage these situations. So I started making a diary. But then at the same time, I was walking and walking and walking. And together with Jackie, we talked a lot about how the signage was changing and all the signs were popping up. And so that's really how this project between us started, which is we were literally WhatsApping weird signs to each other. And it grew completely out of that, just a way to evoke those very strange feelings of compression at the beginning of the pandemic and closure, and then how it opened up and how it made us think, I guess. Is that fair?
Great. Yeah, great. And there's a few things you've mentioned there that I definitely I'm going to ask you about in a bit. But before then, let's head over to Akshay. It looks like I just made you jump. Akshay.
Yeah, I'm just so amazed. It's such a well-behaved team here. Everybody is so polite. My name is Akshay. I'm an artist and I work primarily on the topics surrounding violence. And during this time in the lockdown, I went back into the archives trying to think about our reflection of like the political scenario right now, and how do we look at what is maybe the insider versus the outsider of some place, and our perception of things. But thank you.
Great, brilliant, thank you.
And oh yeah, and I'm presenting this film called Blue is the Enemy.
Yeah,
thank
you very much.
Thanks.
I think you actually closed the festival today. Actually, you were our last film to go up.
So posh.
There are no hierarchies here. There are no headliners. You can claim it as a glory if you want. Let's go over to Allissa.
And I'm just kind of learning how to make films right now. I think similarly to Akshay, I actually went to the archives in a sort of response to the current affairs of this year and, you know, everything that's going on. So my film is Where Are We Going? Where I've kind of reappropriated a lot of archival footage, found footage, in order to kind of tell a narrative about how Britain's history, its colonial past, continues to inform so much of the global present, whether it's the global protests with Black Lives Matter, or even, you know, the wildfires in America, in Australia. Yeah, I'm just really interested in, I guess, destabilizing a lot of systems that we take for granted but are showing themselves to be untenable right now.
Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah, and that sort of political edge that came out in a lot of the work that we've seen today between all of the artists here is definitely something that I'm hoping to get into in a bit more detail. But before we do, let's go to Gwen.
Hi, I'm Gwenllian Spink. I am an artist. Generally, I work with sculpture, but recently my work's become increasingly site-specific. And over the past few months, I've been working a lot with kites, integrating my drawings, printing my drawings onto fabric and making kites. So for this project, I made a kind of open access booklet on how to make a few kites using everyday materials you have at home. So I used, for example, an old umbrella, bin bags, paper, those kind of things. Yeah.
Great. Lovely. Brilliant. And then finally, Sanjoy Dey, please tell us about yourself.
Hi everyone. I was really listening and enjoying. This is really a wonderful thing that these are so talented people, those who are working in different genre, and it is actually I'm very fortunate to work with you and with this Poplar digital project, this one. As we know that a river always offers hope and wash all the ugly things. And so I have selected this project, which has been named The Music of Rivers. And so as I was saying that, rivers have always played a pivotal role in making bonds with human beings of different lands. So, that's what my theme is. And I have selected the other artists, those who have also recorded in front of the rivers of different countries. So, this music symbolizes those spiritual essences which are much needed at this time of COVID. That's what I felt. And yeah, congratulations to everyone who have participated in this project. It's really, I would love to work with you guys if I get the opportunity, whenever, wherever. That's it.
Great. Yeah, a couple of things, and thank you, Sanjoy, for that. A couple of things I should have mentioned at the beginning, actually. So one is this thing around, like Sanjoy was saying, we always really hope that with the last festival and certainly with this, that this is also an opportunity to link people up. A lot of the artists whose work has been shown in this festival are based in and around East London. They're quite local to us at Poplar Union. So yeah, we hope that more collaboration, both with us, but also with each other, will come out of this. And I also wanted to mention, just because she isn't here, today we also had a brilliant submission from Donna Rogers, who she works at, or she's been developing her work at the Submit to Love Studios in partnership with Headway, which is a charity that supports people who have been affected with brain injuries. And Donna's work is very reflective of her sort of perspective as someone who has experienced sort of neurological trauma. But it's because of that for a few reasons that the Q&A format was not sort of ideal for her, but definitely go and check out her work to hear Donna's thoughts and ideas about what she's produced. And we should also have Theo Hartman with us, who I'm hoping might join in eventually, but also his film submitted today as well is well worth checking out, and I'm hoping Theo will join us by the end, because yeah, I've got burning questions for him as well. Great, well, thanks everyone for introducing yourselves. I want to begin, actually, so we sort of already mentioned this around something that really struck me watching your films, was this sort of coming together of things that are very personal but also very political, and things that are very public but also quite private. And I think it's something we've kind of all been grappling with during lockdown, the fact that even right now we're all in our homes, but we can all see each other's homes, and the kind of the inside has become outside, and the domestic has become quite public. And I wanted to actually start with you, Allissa. You mentioned your work has this sort of political grounding, but I was also really interested in how you work with time and looking at the kind of history of activism and the history of sort of colonial roots, but also looking ahead to the future, and the fact that the title of your piece is asking a question about the future and where we're going. Yeah, I've even written in my notes, I want to remember as it's the only way we can look forward, which I think is a really interesting provocation. So I was just interested to know, what was it about the brief that led you to explore these ideas, and sort of, yeah, what is your idea of the future and where we're going?
Thank you for the kind words. So I guess the way I understood the brief, I think looking out for me was immediately evocative of looking out for one another. And I think I was really, I'm very moved, and I continue to be moved by the work of activists, historically and right now, because I think it's amazing what people can achieve. And it always, I think it's quite easy to feel powerless against huge bureaucratic systems, but you can see that grassroots organizations do enact very real change. So I think for me, the looking out component was thinking about how we care for one another in a community, and in that there's a kind of self-reflexive element. Why are we doing what we do, and considering the histories that have led to the conditions that facilitate a need for community care. But then that kind of leads to a looking up, and it's a kind of more optimistic view of the future. And I think it's really easy to feel depressed by the world and geopolitics, but I do think optimism is a political imperative. You have to be optimistic in order to keep going forward and to imagine a better world. And I think what is really important as well is, in the face of everything, oppression and pain, that doesn't need to be the basis of what unites people. I think the legacy of resistance in Britain, across the world, that can be something that, you know, unites us and inspires us to keep working for a better future.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, if I answered the question, but these are just kind of things I've been thinking about this year.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And I know at last night's Q&A, a lot of the artists were talking about joy, and how, because of how sort of horrendous this year has been, that becomes the default narrative, and to be joyful becomes quite radical and quite subversive, which seems sort of, I mean, it's really quite sad in a way that is the way things are. But I think, I mean, we found with our, we've recently just done our Black History Month sort of events and things throughout October. And one of the things that a lot of the artists we were working with then were saying is, after this year, we don't want this ongoing narrative to be the history of oppression and slavery and oppression. It's actually, we want to celebrate our history and our future as something entirely positive, and something that should be sort of, celebrated, and recognize that it doesn't have to be oppression that motivates change, but actually it can be optimism. And I should also say that I'm seeing a few nodding heads. Any of our other artists, if you do want to chime in, this is very much just a conversation, so don't worry, you don't have to wait. Jackie, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I really enjoyed Alyssa's film. It's very moving, and especially loved how you wove together the archive footage with the train ride on the DLR, passing through the landscape of the Docklands. I think all of us are very familiar with. So I guess my question was just about how you see this landscape around us, and how that kind of connects with the global history that you were referring to in the historical materials.
Thank you, that's really nice of you. I guess, you know, obviously, so I live in like Docklands, I'm sure, and near Canary Wharf. So I think there's a real connection with a lot of, so with the docks, because this was like the entry port for a lot of the imports and exports from the colonies. I think that's quite like a immediate connection, and we see Canary Wharf right now as kind of a symbol of kind of like rampant global capitalism, which it's kind of, I guess we also see that in Clare's work, actually, kind of really examining Canary Wharf as this particular locus of so many global flows. Yeah, I think that's.
And
I
it's
think
so many layers as well, isn't it? It works on so many historical layers as well, like you're saying, in terms of colonialism and slavery and trade. It's you peel it, and there's just like so much more underneath it all the time. I don't know. I think there were. I felt there were links between my work and your work. Seemed quite linked.
I'm glad you said that, Claire, because the totally seamless link from question to question that I was hoping for is now happening, because my next question was for you. So thank you all for setting that up so perfectly. People will think we rehearsed this. But yeah, so Claire, I wanted yeah, exactly. Weeks in the planning, minutes in the planning. I wanted to come to you next because of that. So your work, on the one hand, felt sort of hyper local to Poplar Union, to use a phrase that has become very popular recently. So because of that sort of motif of Canary Wharf and the sort of local area. But then there also seemed to be something sort of huge about your work as well, around sort of these roots in London's history, and also sort of the UK's history in sort of colonial terms, and that sort of trading terms. Was that something that at the start of your process of making the work, did you know that that was a sort of route that you want to go to? Because it felt like in the work it starts with these sort of visuals of Canary Wharf, and then it starts to weave in these sort of murals and sort of things we see up in train stations, and these images nodding to our colonial past. Did you know from the start that that was what the narrative of your work was going to be, or was it something you sort of discovered whilst, you know, putting the work together?
I think oh, is that me? Have I got playback?
No, you're okay.
So sorry. I think it's actually thinking about. I'd never thought about it in those terms, but I think it's actually a motive of my life in Poplar, because when I started living here, I was teaching in a local school, and from the window of my school, you could see Canary Wharf in the background. This sort of a bit like in one of those films where the mouse has to go and find its long lost cousin in the crazy city. And then in front of that, you had the flats and the poverty of housing and resource that also exists in Tower Hamlets. And I think I've always been aware of the tensions between the I don't know, Babylonian kind of attraction of Canary Wharf in all its lights and its glory and its glamour and its glitz, and the poverty and the history of struggle in this area as well. And so I think that's probably how it came to inform my work. And I think whenever I go to Canary Wharf, I have a tension between, you know, loving being there and loving being able to take advantage of all the wonderful things that it offers, if you have the means and the feeling of ability to go there and to do that. And a lot of the community in Poplar doesn't feel that they can do that. And then also being aware of the fact that that is founded on enslavement, it's founded on corruption, it's founded on such rivers of greed and power and politics and stuff, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something quite strange about it, even just architecturally, which I think your piece shows, how it does feel like it's almost like it should have like a moat around it. It feels like a sort of fortress, and there's this huge invisible social, financial, cultural moat that goes around it that keeps
Definitely.
some people out.
And in fact, in a way it does, because you've got barriers to all the entrances and the exits, and it's got its own security. So it is very much like a castle, isn't it? Like a in a way.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, staying sort of with that hyper local and staying in Poplar, which was actually one of the real, it definitely, when we put the call out for submissions, it was never a criteria that, you know, artists had to be from East London, but it was actually lovely to see what an overwhelming response we had from people who did sort of live in and around the area. I wanted to speak now to Jackie and Roz, who are collectively known as the Sign Collectors, because I felt your work kind of on this similar trajectory from Alyssa's and Clare's. You had that real, I think the thing that I sort of loved most in your work was that it went from this very public, a lot of Roz's sort of narration was outside the signs that you were seeing, and then drawing you into this really domestic, quite intimate space of on Jackie's boat, which I know you're both on the cut, and then these lovely sort of intimate acts of collaging and cutting and quite poetic sort of language. How could you tell us a bit about your sort of process of making the work? How did you come together as collaborators? And what was it a conscious decision to have something so sort of public and private, or was that just how you were sort of experiencing lockdown? Either of you leap in.
We kind of talked a little bit about this, didn't we? Because we thought you might ask that. It's been very organic. I mean, I think we started from a point of conversation, not even knowing we were doing this. So it was almost like we kind of understood what each other was thinking. And that meant there was a certain connectivity between what we were doing without us having to actually talk about it, which is kind of, and it came about very organically. I don't know, I think it's really interesting thinking about Canary Wharf, because whenever I went to Canary Wharf in my film, I noticed that I mention it's Canary Wharf, and everywhere else I go, I don't actually say where it is. It's like Canary Wharf is this alienated space that you need to get permission to go into. And I almost think, that worked the other way around when it came to kind of going to Jackie's poems. We were going from this outside space where anyone could be to a permitted space which Jackie let us into, to her poems, which are obviously very soft and quite abstract kind of reflections of her thoughts.
Yeah, it was really quite, I think, magical how it all came together, because Roz and I are neighbors in the Limehouse Marina, so we just naturally talk every time we see each other. I mean, maintaining the social distance, of course. And I remember, I think when we started thinking about this project, the only things we knew that was for sure is that we all collected lots of signs, and we were both writing, but we didn't even know what each other was writing about until we got this commission from Poplar Union. Then we exchanged our writings, and it was just amazing to see how different they are, but also how they also resonate some way, I guess, through this interface of COVID signs. And then we just talked about how we could organize them in terms of the timeline.
And I think we kind of gave ourselves, I think it was really useful, the two of us, because I think both of us are used to working with other people. So I work to support communities to tell their stories, often activist stories, like community stories. And Jackie is obviously an academic. So using the personal, using our own stories, being quite introspective is quite unnatural for both of us. So I think we together were able to make ourselves do that and allow ourselves to like give our own voice, our own voice heard, as opposed to facilitating the voices of others.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Sorry, go ahead, Jackie. Were you going to say something?
Oh, I think it's a personal first, many levels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how did you find, so like Roz, you mentioned earlier that just as we were going into lockdown, you were going onto your maternity leave, which I guess, I mean, speaking as someone who doesn't have children, but has many nephews and nieces, my sisters have told me like that's kind of a lockdown in itself. How did you find that, like, what was that? It feels like everyone's kind of, the shape of people's lives has sort of contorted and shifted and changed. And I think your piece together, it shows that really beautifully, how sort of different outside space becomes and how governed it is and policed and controlled. How did you find that, those two experiences of going into sort of your, I guess, motherhood or going into your maternity leave at the same time as having your whole sort of life changed for you in a way? How did you sort of navigate those two experiences?
I think I've not really, in one way, because it happened at the same point. So I think your life gets compressed, and then we were compressed by lockdown at the same time. And so, I mean, in one way it was great because all my friends couldn't go out either. And so I had to talk to me on Zoom, which would not have happened necessarily anyway. So for me, writing was really important. And that's what my part of the project really comes from. I actually wrote so many words, and this is a very, very contracted version of what I've written. It's just really lonely, I think. I think that's what everyone's found. This experience of lockdown is lonely. The experience of early motherhood, when you're working out who the hell you are, because you're kind of the same person as the baby, and you're not the same person as the baby, and your whole identity is shifting, and you haven't got anything to hold on to. And lockdown was the same. So that kind of intense loneliness and absence of people to talk to, I think was quite scary. For us all, maybe. I don't know. When I rewatched the film today, I haven't seen it for just a short bit, and it does bring back that horror, squalid kind of misery that we were all in March and April, certainly, when our lives are so small. And yeah, it was difficult, I'd say, but I think I had it easy compared to a lot of people because I was on maternity, so I was being paid and I didn't have to go anywhere. So compared to people who are key workers and had to actually work or have to go on the tube when it's full, or all of the other people who have much harder experience of lockdown, it was okay.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Because I still feel there's something, and this will bring us on to Sanjoy. I think there's your piece, I think it definitely touches on loneliness, and there's a steady pace, and you can sort of feel that time shifting when you're watching it. But I felt there are moments of hope. I think there are elements that I thought, like when you talk about your takeaway food being like deliciously greasy and things like, I think it also really showed how when things slow down, you actually maybe appreciate other things more. It can also really heighten things.
Well, I think the river is really important, and I really enjoyed Sanjoy's from that perspective as well. For me, the river was this place of joy, this place of escape, a place of beauty, and I think it was for everyone else because the river paths, I've never seen them so full. I mean, when we were still distancing at 2 meters, which I think is less so now, and everyone was really paranoid, watching people kind of loop around each other on the river path was kind of funny because everyone was jumping because everyone needed that flowing water. And yeah, I actually walked around the Isle of Dogs a few times, which is quite a long walk, but it's just that connection with the water was so important. Yeah,
absolutely. And again, thank you for teeing me up so perfectly to go to my next question. But yeah, I think this idea of the rivers, and actually yesterday we had, and it will obviously be on our YouTube now, there was a film from Victoria Muldoon, who's a filmmaker, and her piece Swaniful, which was all about her mum sort of and her relationship to the swans, and that yeah, and even we've had a colleague of mine at Poplar Union, her like daily updates during lockdown was watching this family of swans with their cygnets growing on the Limehouse Cut. But yeah, so Sanjoy, I wanted to ask you about this, and sort of your film had such a beautiful sort of cross-cultural yeah, just this idea of us all being connected through these sort of how through our relationship to water and the different rivers, whether it's in the River Thames or rivers in Bangladesh or all across the world. And as Roz mentioned, this idea of, you know, I think in some ways during lockdown people have felt sort of more isolated than ever before, but also in some ways really connected because we can do things like this, and suddenly talking to someone in New Zealand, they're just as local as someone in North London because this is our only means of communicating. So I'd love to hear from you about sort of that idea of connectivity and how that related to the sort of the music and the poetry in your film.
Yes, first of all, thank you, Beth. And in your first part, I actually forgot to introduce myself. I'm Sanjoy Dey, and definitely I live near, I mean, just beside the Thames. So it's in Canary Wharf.
Ah.
And the thing is, I'm looking into the river every day, every moment, in fact, from the window as well. So just during the lockdown, I was just thinking of, you know, how to engage the artists, the performers from different places. So I wish if I could engage more artists, more performers in this. But again, the river always, you know, shows me that, you know, life has to go on, you know. So whatever and wherever, whatever the thing is happening in this world, but the life has to go on. So it keeps me saying and giving me this message. And then I realized that, you know, I should engage these performers, those who are in these countries. Like I have selected some of the poetries which are really very, I mean, related to this river. So as I have mentioned earlier, that, you know, Bangladesh is full surrounded by rivers, as we know. And I am from India. India is also has got so many rivers surrounded by. So, you know, as because this river is saying all about positivity, the life and everything. So I have selected the poetries, which is really, you know, you must have listened to Sri Ganguly, who has recited this poetry, and the Bengali translation has been recited by another performer called Shoma Ghosh. Then I just tried to, I have tried to amalgamate with all these things, all this, so that the subject will be the same, the river, and which is spreading the message, the positivity during this pandemic period, so that the people will be, you know, they will get the enthusiasm towards the life. So that's my thing is.
Lovely. It's really interesting to see, and like Allissa mentioned, this idea of optimism as something that is really sort of motivating. And it's quite interesting to see compared to the work back in when we did this festival the first time in August, and we worked very similar, sort of, it was the same brief with about 15 or 16 different artists. So much of the work that came out then was very much about sort of, it was very introspective, it was quite bleak, a lot of the work was quite I guess kind of angst ridden, it was a lot to do with mental health, and it was, I mean, it was brilliant, beautiful work, but it's actually quite lovely to see now how doing this same commission and this same sort of festival, but several months later, there's so much more optimism in the work, and it's quite nice to see this sort of shift in a way, that even though there is still that sort of concern and definitely that kind of maybe more reflective sort of political anxiety. It's lovely to see that.
Because I'm a singer and a composer, so it was quite easy for me, to plan this sort of things, because I have already sang one song which has been composed by me. So, I mean, which is also saying the same feelings, the same concept about the river. So there is a storyline there. So that's what I have composed in that lyric, actually. So in this way, I tried to say that, whoever, I mean, whatever our profession is, like whatever the thing we are doing, we have to be positive. We have to spread this to all of our neighbors, to all of the people, all of our friends, that, during this time, we have to be very positive to flow.
Great, lovely.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I think also that there's a duality about, as the external has kind of shut down, it's opened up an internal, a reflection. We've been forced to look at our own resourcefulness and our own resources and explore our creativity in a way that we may not have done if this hadn't have happened. So I think even though there are a lot of negative things happening and there's a lot of challenging stuff going on externally and internally, because people have had huge mental health problems and issues around the changes. I think it's also opened up a space where we can start to explore other things in ourselves as well. So maybe that's reflected in the work that is coming through now, perhaps.
Yes, I do admit. Yeah, absolutely. I actually think like this. We can, we can see the inner self, the power within. We can think about many aspects. So in a way, it is helping us. I'm very positive in every sense. And this is what I feel, I have got so many ideas. And I am really, to be honest with you, I'm planning to do some more works like this. Day by day, I'm just gradually exploring myself, my inner self, the power I'm having. So in a way, it is, we are fortunate. Those who are like very creative persons, I think like that, we can think more. We can think more about like this project. It could help all of us, not only us, but all of the people. So yeah. It's a good message.
Absolutely. And I think it's something quite important, something Claire, you touched on then about creativity as well. And it's part of the reason we're in an art centre, so we are very creative people, but it's been interesting, I think, how through the lockdown, I think a lot of people have turned to things like, it could be as simple as this sort of, this natural desire to create things. So whether it's the rainbow signs in people's windows or people doing sort of Zoom dance routines and things like that. It's quite interesting how in a time of crisis, it seems that some form of creativity just innately comes out of us, or it's quite instinctive in us to make something or to be productive in some way and produce things. So and it's another reason also why, and again, I probably should have mentioned this earlier, with the first commission that we did in August, we went specifically to artists that were due to be showing work at Poplar Union, but because of the lockdown weren't able to. Whereas this commission was an open call out, and we were actually really excited by the amount of responses we had from people who would never call themselves an artist. They might work, we had like Destiny, who was her work was shown yesterday. She works in a mental health unit for the NHS and things like that. So it's quite interesting to say, no, you are an artist. Anyone can be an artist and anyone can be creative. It's just not, you know, just because you don't get paid to do it, or because it's not your job, whatever it may be. But yeah, and it's lovely to see work coming from people who it might be their sort of bit on the side or a hobby or something like that, but actually yeah.
And I think that also, like Allissa was saying about activism and power, the power that we have, that creativity is a form of power, is a form of activism. And I think, you know, we are all creatives, we are all artists, and it's maybe that this pausing in the craziness of everyday life is actually giving us the space to find that within ourselves. And there are many, many ways to be a creative and to be making and taking that power and using that power in different ways. I think it strikes me how it all interlinks. It's all.
I really agree. I think this kind of opportunity to do things slowly is really interesting, because you can let thoughts kind of trickle into your head. And one of the things I loved with, sorry to go back to Canary Wharf, but when it was shut down and it was empty, you felt maybe we could rebuild the world better. And in my opinion, sadly, Canary Wharf's kind of back to normal again. But we had this pause, we had this place where things had stopped. And I think hopefully we can use our creativity to say, actually, we need to change parts of the world. And that's a place where we can fit in. And the arts is important, whatever certain people in government may think. And creativity is one of the ways that we can make a better world for everyone. So, yeah, that's something I really believe when I was walking around there.
Absolutely true.
Well, I mean, on that note, we turn to someone who is a self-identifying artist and someone who does call themselves an artist, which is Akshay. And so I think actually of all the submissions we had, I think Blue is the Enemy is the one that is probably the most open to interpretation. And actually, I know from conversations we've had, you were quite cautious around not giving too much from your perspective almost, and letting your audience sort of draw their own conclusions and ideas of what the work means for you or means to them. I know I have my own thoughts on it, and I don't want to influence anyone with them now. But yeah, I'd love to hear a bit about your sort of thinking with the work, how you interpreted the brief. Again, like interestingly, having spoken so much about sort of the rivers in Sanjoy's work and that kind of sense of flow and things, it's quite interesting, the sound in your work as well. I think it's easy to be preoccupied with the fact it's called Blue is the Enemy. It has this really bold image of these three different faces with this blue light. But actually the sound really is probably what moved me most in your work, and was the most sort of conjuring of different ideas and thoughts. Because it is this the sound of waves crashing for anyone who maybe hasn't seen the work yet. Could you just talk a bit about, as much as you're willing to reveal, about your process and how the brief led to the work that you've produced?
Well, it's so interesting to see all the other people talk about the process, and unfortunately, I've not been to Canary Wharf, at least in the past 5 years. But I guess it's just put us all in the same space, right? With this, we are looking at the same information and we are examining ourselves, but maybe in this sense of isolation, there is also this examination of position, of who we are and where we stand, and not just necessarily our practice or like just a way to do something. And I think it's aligned globally for all of us now. Like people in America, they know about the protests in different parts of the world. They know about India, or like people in Egypt putting Black Lives Matters. It's a much more informed community. And I think that's what gives me optimism. And that's what I've been thinking of within making this work too, like just trying to examine our position and what we are scared of, and rather and trying to think of like what is the reality of that fear.
Right.
And I think it's obviously it's in everyone's work. It's very easy to see that we are dealing with the same issues of like human connection. How do we feel about contact? How do we feel about isolation and intimacy? Or like, how do we feel like, where do we stand? Are we like active participants, or are we just observing something? And I think those are, like, that is what I was thinking of when trying to make this film, because I had already filmed this some time ago. I had the footage, but now because of the lockdown, I couldn't go out and shoot. So I started rethinking of how to present ourselves, like present this.
And what does, for you, that title, Blue is the Enemy, what sort of, where does that come from for you? What does that sort of, what does that mean for you, I guess?
I guess an easy way to look at it would be that we just this title, like without examining why blue is the enemy or what is the story behind blue, there is just a declaration. And we tend to make these declarations quite a lot. Like we have these understanding, these assumption of things. Like Sanjoy was just talking about the river, and yes, it is true that it is so energetic and it reminds me of life, but at the same time it also reminds me of like horrible things happening in Bangladesh because of the water level rising. And once that viewpoint changes, I don't necessarily feel there is a need for like a conscious further engagement, but this acknowledgement itself means a lot. And this acknowledgement now changes things. Now you cannot just look at Sanjoy's work non-politically anymore, or any other work, even making kites by Gwen. Everything is political if you start digging into it. And we all play like a very active role, but I guess the advantage is as an artist, you can play a super active role, like you can really be out there. Does this answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right. And I think what I really love about your work as well is it shows how it's so stripped back, the work you've made, but it feels so weighty with, and I know sort of around the sort of halfway mark of while you were making it, we were talking about just that combination of the sound of waves, or that sort of the sound of the sea, how that's become quite loaded when you think about the sort of migrant crisis we've had. The sea has become a sort of bit of a political playground almost. You've got, the sort of issues around migration. You then have even down to things around Brexit, and suddenly we're concerned about the rights around fishing. And I think you can take such a simple sound that's such a universal sound to everyone, the sound of waves crashing, and suddenly it becomes so weighted with meaning, I think, especially when you have these sort of anonymous faces as well, and you're just confronting another person, you're just sat looking at another person. So yeah, I think there was huge power in that.
Definitely. And like, I think the political scenario, especially in the Western world, or even like the entire world, like there is so much turbulence now, and you can't escape this turbulence. And I feel like at least all the young people have gotten together and to think, we're going to do something about it. And I really like that. It's not just like, oh, it's happening anymore.
Yeah.
So I think power to the people.
Power to the people, exactly. And again, it's lovely that it's become such a theme, especially after yesterday's Q&A. There was so much talk about joy. I think optimism is definitely, and optimism and activity seems to be or activism is definitely the theme of what we've been talking about today. Great. And Claire, go ahead.
Can I just say that I was just thinking, because Alyssa's piece posed lots of questions, lots of really interesting, overt questions. And I liked the fact that it posed questions rather than giving answers, even though the answers were alluded to in the video. Whereas Akshay's piece posed implicit questions. I felt watching those the people sitting there, and you started questioning who they were, why they were there, what was their motive, and there was a link, I think, between the two pieces of work in the posing of the questions, and perhaps it reflects also on the questions that we ask ourselves at this moment in time, internally as well as externally. I just wanted to say that I felt there was that link between the two, which I thought was really profound.
Yeah, I was quite excited by the curation, and also like the selection of the films really puts forward a certain build-up of the questioning, and they start to become denser and in some way darker also. Maybe.
Yeah, no, it's lovely, and yeah, I think that's really a lovely point, Claire. Actually, I think I hadn't thought of that, but it's so true, that difference of those sort of explicit questions and then implicit questions, or one that presents questions to the viewer and then one that provokes questions from the viewer in a way, which is it's a lovely I'd love to claim that I had really foreseen that, and that was exactly why I curated them in the order that I did, but I don't think I can. So, well, we have been talking about the sea, and we will now seamlessly look up into the sky with our final artist. And thank you, Gwen, for sticking with us and listening to everyone chatting. But yeah, certainly last but by absolutely no means least, your work was probably one of the most the medium was probably one of the most, like, I don't want to say unusual in a negative way, but in like a really exciting way. As soon as I saw kite making zine, I was like, she's in. We have to do this. But and again, talking about optimism, I think there's so much in your work. The fact that it's a manual, I loved the idea of how practical it was in a context of people sort of looking quite literally just for things to do. But then obviously there's I think there is a lot of meaning attached to flying kites, and something so freeing, and it's such a sort of symbol of freedom and liberation and space. So I'd love to hear from you about how the brief led to the work you made, and what kite making means to you.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks, Beth, for the kind words. And also, it's been really interesting to hear what everyone's been discussing and describing your works. With kites, I began making kites at the beginning of lockdown because it was a way to basically get outside as well, and to fly the kites. And in the same way that Sanjoy was talking about rivers and that flow of the river, I have a similar relationship with the wind, because it's a traveller. And when you're feeling very static, like you're not really moving or going anywhere, this feeling of being outside and with the wind and the wind's traveling is just a release. So it was quite impulsive why I began making kites, but then also I think it's so important now, and just generally, you know, with the lockdown, but also because we're living in a kind of a climate crisis, to build this relationship with the landscape around you instead of kind of isolating ourselves in our little bubbles. So for me, kites are also a prop almost between you and the landscape, and you're building this relationship with your environment, wherever that may be. And I really wanted to make this booklet like an open access booklet. There's so much online already. And on YouTube, there's so many tutorials by people globally making kites using everyday materials. And then I just wanted to experiment with the materials I had lying around me, and try and reuse waste materials maybe that we would otherwise throw away, to make kites and share it with others.
Lovely, yeah. I think that's great. I think it's really interesting as well, the fact that, as you said earlier, about that you're a sculptor, or that you work in sculpture, and to think of kites as a kind of quite a sculptural thing as well, I think is a sort of, yeah, a beautiful idea of reimagining also of like of an entire art form in a way of what it can be. Yeah, I think, and again, I think someone else mentioned earlier that even there's something quietly political in what you do because of its connotations, as you say, with sort of climate change, but then also the kind of the idea of making something sustainable and reusing things and upcycling things. Yeah, I think it's such a innovative approach to I don't know, making meaning out of things, or how you present these sort of ideas. Yeah, and how do you envisage, so I know this is sort of something that you're starting. How did you find also the process of adapting the sort of zine to a digital thing?
Yeah.
What was that like for you?
That was something new for me. I haven't really made booklets or zines, or it was kind of a more design element that I haven't experimented with before. So it was something new, and it was great during lockdown to be able to yeah, play with that. Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, I think play is a really good word for it as well. I think there's a really playful quality to the work, and I think, again, going back to what we've already been saying about sort of the importance of being joyful, and that actually that kind of whimsical or playfulness has become kind of, I feel like in 2020, after coughing, laughing is the next taboo. It's like we can, you know, it's like, no, you must be grumpy and sad, and it's like, well, actually no, you can make and go and fly a kite and it will be a wonderful thing. Great, well, thank you so much, and thank you, Gwen, for telling us more about your work. But thank you to everyone for being here tonight, and for sort of sharing all of your thoughts and ideas, and being so generous to each other. And before we sort of start to wrap up, is there anything just more broadly that anyone wanted to...
I want to share this thing that we want to be connected with each other, because these creativity is encouraging me as well. I am pretty sure that each one of us are having the creativity which could inspire, encourage others. So this is very important during this time. That's what I was just listening to Spink, and I was just thinking of me myself, if I could learn this thing from her. So, you know, there are a lot of things to learn from each one of you. So it's very interesting, and it will be my privilege to, you know, learn and to talk about this and to know about certain things which I have no clue, no idea, you know, about some sort of things. So, you know, this is the best way to become more creative, to become more energetic, to become more positive. So thanks to you, Beth, for arranging this thing. It's really a lot of thanks to you as well.
Oh, thank you.
It's a lot of job to do. Yeah.
No, it's been a pleasure. It's actually been sort of one of the most sort of exciting things for us, and I'm sure I speak for Will, who was doing the Q&A yesterday, and everyone at Poplar Union, that actually it's kind of, you know, I don't think we could ever have, the whole of 2020 basically has been just a complete learning curve for us, and being sort of finding positives in it. And one of the things has definitely been doing these sort of digital art festivals that we know we just wouldn't have done them if it hadn't been for what's gone on this year. We would have just, you know, but it's completely changed our thinking about how we show artworks, how we link artists with one another, and also with audiences. So no, I'm so glad that it's been enjoyable for all of you, and useful. Great. Okay, I think we're just past the 8 o'clock mark, so I will start to wrap up. but I just wanted to say, first of all, a huge thank you to all of you, all of our lovely artists, for submitting their work and for talking so generously tonight. And also an absolutely massive thank you to Erin and Stacey for interpreting this so beautifully. I know it's tricky when it's sort of like, I don't know, I mean, I find what they do completely incredible anyway. But yeah, when you're talking about ideas as diverse as sort of radical political ideas, and then talking about joy and rivers, it's quite a breadth of subjects to be interpreting. So thank you to Erin and Stacey tonight as well. And then just before we go, I should add all of the artworks of all of the lovely artists you see before you now are available on our YouTube page, and the artist whose work was released yesterday, it's all there. So please just go to Poplar Union's channel on YouTube and you will find it all under the Digital Art Festival playlist. And one more plug before we can all go and have our dinner and relax. Tomorrow, as a kind of special feature as part of the Digital Festival, we have the culmination of a project Poplar Union's been working on with a company called Take Stock Exchange over the last few months, which is all about exchanging stories and experiences. And they've produced a beautiful piece of audio storytelling called You, Me, the World and Poplar. And that is going to be being released at 8 o'clock in the morning on Poplar Union's podcast, which you can get on Apple and Spotify, and also through our website. And we also have a BSL interpreted version of the audio on our YouTube page as well, with the lovely Erin also interpreting that, because she gets around, Erin Hutching, so you'll find her on most of our videos. I love saying things like that, but I know she has to interpret. But yeah, so do check out tomorrow's audio. We go from the visual to the oral with You, Me, the World and Poplar. Thank you once again to everyone who's been here tonight, and I hope you all keep making beautiful artworks and connecting with one another. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. Thanks a lot.
See you all soon. Bye.
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 Bye.